Have you ever been in a situation where every option that your brain can come across doesn't work? It's impossible. It's a brick wall. It's solid. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you're doing. And any option you come up with is ending badly. Surely I'm not the only one. I'm sure all of us at some point in our lives have been in a situation where we were stuck. And it doesn't matter which way we go, doesn't matter what we do, as far as our brains are concerned, it's not going to end well for us. I'm sure you've all been in that situation at some point. Some of us more than others. But we've all been there. What do we do in that situation? How do we go about getting out of a situation where, as far as my brain is concerned, it's physically impossible? It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. How do we do that? See, oftentimes in church we talk about asking God for help and that He will get us through a situation. But do we actually believe that? It's one thing to say, yeah, God's going to help me and get me out of a situation. But it's quite another to actually believe that. See, it's easy for me to talk about the Bible. It's easy for me to talk about what Jesus has done. But until I've actually experienced it, until I've actually seen it, it's just head knowledge. And let's face it, our heads are full of knowledge that a lot of it probably isn't that great. I want to go to a story this morning that I'm sure most of you would know off by heart. But I want to dig a little bit deeper this morning and maybe get a few things out of it that we may have missed along the way. Exodus chapter 14. Now, to give you the lead up into Exodus 14, the Israelites have literally just escaped Egypt. They're still in the physical land of Egypt, but they've escaped the clutches of Pharaoh and bondage and slavery and all that. Now, we're not told exactly how long of a time frame it's been between when they escaped from Egypt, the clutches of Pharaoh, to what happens here in Exodus chapter 14. I can imagine it was probably a couple of months worth, maybe less. Because think about it. When we're told, and the Bible was written in a time where females and children weren't accounted as much. So when numbers are given in the Bible, it's usually only adult males. We're told about 600,000 males left Egypt as part of the Israelite company. But we're also told many more came with them. Part of the Egyptians, part of the Egyptians that wanted to get away from all the plagues that had just happened. Now, scholars argue as a result that this number could have been somewhere between 2 to 3 million people. Now, you think about let's just go with 2 million people, just to make it an easy number. You have your entire belongings, you have tents packed up, you have carts, you're dragging all your possessions, all your suitcases. Anybody here ever moved? Yeah? Is it a quick process? No. Now imagine having to move all your stuff on top of that. Sheep, cattle, donkeys, other animals. Are these guys going to be moving quick? No. They're only going to be, I know from Pathfinders, when we do hikes, it's between 20 to 30 kilometers a day, and that's a really, really fast hike. Your average person would probably do much less than that. Add somebody on top of that that's still got, dragging a cart full of all your possessions. You got little kids, you got the elderly, you've got sheep, you've got cows, you've got all that sort of stuff. They're going to be lucky to be making a couple of kilometers a day, if that. So this wasn't a quick process. So from the time that Israel got out of the control of Egypt to the time now that they come to the Red Sea, we don't know the exact time frame, but if I was to take a guess, it would have been at least a couple of months. Because it would have taken them a while, that many people moving that slowly to migrate, where they went. And obviously you couldn't really travel at night time, so you'd have to stop, make a tent, have some food, stop for lunch, have breakfast. It wasn't a quick process. But it's interesting. Now, I'm not going to go through the 10 plagues of Egypt and on what God did to rescue Israel out of Egypt. That's not what we're going to focus on today. But I will say this. It was only a very short time frame before we get to the Red Sea crossing that all this amazing stuff happened. On top of that, in the meantime, we're told a couple of chapters earlier that God provided during the day, he provided a giant pillar of cloud in the sky to give them shade. And at night time, that pillar became a ball of fire to give them light and warmth in the desert. If you've ever been in the desert, you would know that during the day, during day and night, the temperatures are extreme in a desert. So during the day, you're in the plus 40s, and at night time, it's negative degree temperatures. Like there's a huge extreme in temperatures in a desert. So at night time, the fire gave them warmth, and it gave them light as well so they could see. But during the day, the cloud was there so that they didn't get burnt. This happened every single day. And this happened the entire time until Israel got into the land of Canaan. 40 odd years. This is stuff they could see every single day and feel. And yet, we get to this story and something vastly different happens. I'm starting at verse 1, Exodus chapter 14. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Paharoth, between Migdol and the sea opposite Baal Zephron. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land, and the wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord." And so what happens now? Pharaoh, it's almost like when we read the story, Pharaoh's almost like as though he's come to his senses, and all his people, they're like, hang on, we just let a couple of million people, slaves, go, free labor. Who's going to build our temples? Who's going to build our pyramids? Who's going to build all our cities? We've just let them go. Like, what were we thinking? What was wrong with us? They've forgotten all the things that God just did to them to force them to let Israel go. See, when we read the 10 plagues of Egypt, God had designed the 10 plagues of Egypt to demolish and destroy their entire religious and theological beliefs in their gods. Every plague was attacking a tier of their gods. So each plague went up a level of the tier of gods that God was attacking. And it kept going until it got to the last one where the firstborns were died. The God of life, Ra. He attacked that. So through the 10 plagues of Egypt, God absolutely decimated the religious system that Egypt had, the false religious system that Egypt had, and shown that he was the true God of heaven. So they've just gone through all this. But it's funny how the devil works. After a short period of time, he's managed to convince them that going, this wasn't the God of heaven doing stuff. This was just random coincidence. This was just random natural events that happened to us. It wasn't actually supernatural stuff. And the same thing has a tendency to happen to us. It's easy for us to forget God. God will do something amazing for us, and then later on the devil tries to convince us going, you know what, that actually wasn't God. It was this or that, or it was chance, or it was random, or it was whatever the case may be. And we take away from what God has done for us. And so in verse 6, Verse 5. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, "Why have we done this? That we have let Israel go from serving us." So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. In other words, he's overcompensating here just a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of people in Israel, but the reality is they've all just come out of slavery. They're not warriors. They don't know how to fight. They got no weapons. They've got women, kids with them. They've got the elderly. They've got their entire possessions. They've got livestock with them. They couldn't even fight even if they wanted to. So the reality was, from a human point of view, Pharaoh didn't need such an elaborate army. But he wanted to show force. He wanted to make it so that the other nations looking around aren't going to attack him. He's going to go, you know what, I'm going to send everything I've got and I'm going to take these guys back and we're going to make a statement to everybody around us. We'll go down to verse 10. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, "Because there was no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us, to bring us up out of Egypt?" The entire time the plagues happened in Egypt, Israel was protected. And now, only a few months forward, they've completely forgotten about the protection that God gave them, the supernatural protection that God gave them. They've completely forgotten that. And now they've found themselves in a spot where there's this huge army behind them and there is a sea in front of them. They got nowhere to go. You know, some of the stronger ones might try swimming, but what about your kids? What about your elderly? What about your disabled? What about people who aren't strong? What about them? What about all your animals? And from what archaeologists seem to have found, the place where it seems to have happened, they've actually found chariot wheels and bits of chariots buried in the mud, is about, I think they were saying around about the 10-15 kilometre mark, maybe even longer. Now, even your strongest swimmers in an ocean, 10-15 kilometres is really pushing it. You know, I see sometimes stories of people that swim the English Channel there and back, and it takes them years of training to be able to attempt that. Now you think a whole people with kids, with elderly, with livestock, that was never on the option. That was never going to happen. So what do? From a human point of view, they had no way out. From a human point of view, they were done. If they went into the army was behind them, they were going to kill them. If they go into the water, they're going to die in the water. From a human point of view, there was no salvation. There was no way out. They had completely forgotten what God had done for them just weeks, months earlier. And every day since, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. Every single day, they've completely missed that. And they've looked into their own emotions, they've looked into the circumstance and looked at it with human eyes and gone, "Nah, I'm done. Moses, you've just brought us out here to die." But one thing we need to remember, God operates outside of my understanding, my knowledge, and my ability to comprehend. God is not limited by technology. God is not limited by the laws of nature. He invented them. He created them. He can very easily bend them and twist them and change them. The elements listen to God, not the other way around. God is not limited to my understanding. Just because my brain says it's impossible and it can't be done, God turns around and goes, "Try me, and let's see what happens." See, we need to understand that as human beings, we have limitations on what we can understand and comprehend. Our limitations are here, but God operates beyond what my limitations and understandings are, which is why nothing is impossible for God. And many times I've read stories just like Pastor Grollimund where, God has done supernatural, miraculous stuff to get his purposes across. Technology doesn't stop God. I've communicated with people that technology stopped working for whatever reason. Sometimes that call was blocked. Sometimes that call was deleted. God still made it work. God has the power and the capacity to do the impossible. But the reason he doesn't give us all the information, what he's about to do, because firstly, we wouldn't be able to cope or handle it. But secondly, he wants us to learn to trust him and step out in faith. Thankfully, Moses had a level head about him, and he was with God. Verse 13. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." Do you believe that God fights for you? Do you actually believe that? See, God is on our side. He wants to do good for us. He wants to help us. And he fights for us. Let's keep going. Verse 19. And the angel of the Lord and the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them and the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it became the camp of the Egyptians. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud of darkness to one, and it gave light to the other one, so that no one did not come near the other all that night. In other words, suddenly this pillar of cloud that was hovering there, it's now moved. And it's gone in between the Egyptian army and the Israelites. There's still an ocean there, but suddenly, because it was starting to get dark, the Egyptians, they were just covered with complete darkness, whereas this cloud illuminated the camp of Israel. That in and of itself should have been enough evidence for Israel to go, hey, this isn't normal. God must be working for us if this is the case. But they didn't. They kept arguing with God. They kept arguing with Moses, trying to go, hey, Moses, what are you doing? This is stupid. My brain says this can't work. But Moses is saying, just watch and let God take over. He will sort this out. Now, one thing I need to explain a little bit as well. Go over a few chapters to chapter 13. See, in the last plague of Egypt, there was something the Israelites had to do to prepare for this plague. Chapter 13, and I'm starting at verse 21. 21. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families and kill the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of that door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through and strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses and strike you." This sounds like a weird ritual that God got them to do, but it had tremendous meaning. See, at this point in time, Jesus hadn't died on the cross, but what they did here was a representation of what Jesus was going to do on the cross. By getting the blood, and hyssop generally in the Bible and in ancient times was referred to something of cleansing. That's generally what it was associated with. And so they were to use hyssop, and the Passover lamb which they killed, which represented Jesus dying on the cross, they were to take the blood of the lamb and smear it on the door. Meaning that no evil will come in, meaning that the blood of Jesus, a representation of that, was going to protect them. And by doing that, they were accepting the sacrifice that Jesus did on the cross to save them, give them salvation, and forgive them of their sins. And also, as a result, the protection that God gives when we accept Him as our personal Savior, when we accept the blood of Jesus that was spilt on the cross to save me, to save you. There's a psalm in the Bible, Psalm 91. Whenever you're in difficulty, in fact, even when you're not in difficulty, I suggest you pray this psalm, pray this prayer, learn it off by heart, memorize it, recite it in times of difficulty. It's the psalm of protection, the prayer of protection. That and Psalm 121 as well too. We don't have time to read them here this morning, but I suggest go back, read them, memorize them, recite them. Because there's something about when I accept and want Jesus' protection, when I accept His blood that He died on the cross for me, God starts to fight my battles. God starts to step in and do amazing stuff for me without me even realizing it. And the stuff He does, our brains just sit there and go, whoa, what just happened? But let's continue with the story. So back over to Exodus chapter 14. Verse 21. Exodus 14, verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. Now, I'm not talking about a little puddle here that you could easily step through. I'm talking about the sea, however deep the sea is. It's easily well above your head. And so God made, and I don't know how big this was, but if I was to take a guess, if you're going to get 2 million people across the sea with livestock, it's not going to happen single file. You're going to need a fair bit of width. However big that was, I would imagine it was quite big. But God caused it that the water parted. The water parted and it made a pathway for Israel to be able to cross over. And it says there all night. Because once again, 2 million people with everything they've got plus cattle, it would have taken time for them to move. Though I have a funny feeling I don't think they were walking as slowly. I think they were all trying to move as quickly as they probably could have. Because after all, you're walking through this, I guess, channel, and on either side is just these massive walls of water that shouldn't be physically possible staying in the position that they are. So it's probably a place you'd want to get out of pretty quick. You wouldn't want to hang in there any longer than absolutely necessary. God stepped in and did an amazing thing. And He rescued them. He fought for them. And it was only towards the edges of this, when the last of the people were about to finish crossing over, does He lift the darkness from the Egyptians and allow them to start chasing Israel through. And as we read on into the story, when the last of the Israelites came out and all the Egyptians were in the center of it, because they were catching up with them too quick, so God, started throwing wheels off their chariots, getting them bogged in the mud, doing all sorts of stuff so they couldn't catch them. And then when all the Israelites were out, God said, now it is enough. And He's let the waters come back and destroyed all of the Egyptian army. We don't know how many there was, but I would imagine there was quite a few. And you think about it, when you're covered in battle armor, and you're a couple of meters underwater, your ability to swim isn't going to be good. And so they all drowned. But there's more to this story than we just read on the surface. Egypt is a representation of the devil, of evil, of everything that stems from the devil and the slavery he puts us under to do what he wants us to do the wrong thing, to have the wrong things done to us. God is the one who rescues us from that. And as we can see with Israel, he protects and guides us every step of the way, even though we don't necessarily realize it. He's there. He's there covering us with his cloud. He's there providing us warmth and fire and light, even though we don't see it. And just like the Israelites, when we get into a tight spot, what do? We have a tendency to turn around and grumble and whinge and whine at God, going, God, why did you allow this? What's wrong, God? Well, why aren't you protecting me? Why aren't you looking after me? And God sort of sits there scratching his head, turning around, going, really? You're forgetting all this stuff that I just did for you? It's human nature. It's our sinful human nature that we have a tendency to oppose God, which is why we need rescuing, which is why we need what Jesus did on the cross to save us. Because humanity had gotten to a point where they could no longer save themselves. They were not capable. They were so enslaved by the devil and their minds so corrupted by sin, they were not capable to save themselves. Which is why Jesus turned around and said, I will provide that salvation for you. And just like with Israel, the fight doesn't stop straight away. The devil keeps trying to get us. And he gets us to a point where we don't see an out. Even though we have God's protection, it appears like I don't have God's protection. It appears like God's not on my side. It appears like God's not fighting for me. But the reality is, he's the one standing in the cloud between me and the army. He's the one opening the way through the sea so that I can get out. He's the one that's providing a solution. Now, the thing we need to remember, the solution that I come up with to a problem, 99% of the time is not the solution that God comes up with the problem. And then when God does his thing and it doesn't line up with the idea that I have in my head, oh, well, God, now you're in trouble now, God. I'm going to let you have it because you didn't do exactly how I wanted you to act. And God sits there and goes, but I can see so much more than you can. I know so much more than you do. I can do so much more than you can. And what I'm doing is for your best interests. And it's better than the idea you're coming up with yourself. But instead, human nature, oh, but God, it didn't work this way. Why would you do this? And we go through this cycle of arguing with God. You know, when Moses was at the burning bush and God asked him to do something, what did he do? He just sat there and argued and argued and argued to the point where God got sick of him. He's like, right, enough, go. I don't want to listen anymore. Just go and do it. And that's what we do. That's a tendency we have. When God asks us to do something, when God asks us to trust him going, hey, I have a solution to this problem. You may not see it or understand it at this point in time, but I have a solution. You need to trust me. You need to believe that I can protect you, that I've got you, that I fight for you, and that I'll sort this out. But too often, instead of letting God sort it out, we want to sort it out ourselves. And that's where we get ourselves into trouble. God goes, I can help you. I want to help you. But until such time as you ask me and give me permission to step in and help, I'm not going to. See, this is the one really big, powerful thing about prayer that a lot of people don't realize. When I pray, I am essentially giving God permission to work and do his thing. God says, because the devil has come onto this world, God says, hey, I'm a God of love, I'm a God of choice. Love cannot exist if there's no choice. So God says, in order to prove my character to the rest of the universe and to prove that I'm a God of love, I will not intervene unless you ask me to. Unless you give me permission to work in your life to help you out, I'm not going to. That's how God operates. But the second we ask him, he's more than happy to jump in. But we need to be prepared that he's going to do it his way, not my way. Because the time frame and the idea that I have in my head, more often than not, won't line up with the way God's going to do it. God will sort it out, just won't necessarily be the way I may want it at that particular time. But when you look back on life and go, yep, you know what? The way God did it, yeah, that's probably worked out a lot better than if I'd done it on my own way. I would have just made things worse. This story is so much more than just a physical story. God here is teaching us, going, hey, when you're stuck between a hard place and a rock, or in this instance, the desert and the sea and the army, I have a solution for you. I'm protecting you. I have got your back. You just have to trust me. You just have to step out in faith and let me work. But more often than not, it's the stepping out in faith part that we don't like, because it's scary. There's too many risks. It may not be safe. I could go on and on and on. That list is huge. If a person was to wait until all the risk has been removed, until they saw every little tiny detail of what they had to do and where to walk, not one single person on this planet would ever move. This is true of business. This is true of work. This is true with God. Think about all the businesses. If a business was to make a decision and go, we're going to wait until we make a decision, until all the possible risks have been removed, until we make that decision. Is that ever going to happen? No. Same is with us, with our spiritual walk. We're told that it was only when Israel started moving towards the water did God intervene and open and make a way for them to escape. Had they stayed where they were, it wouldn't have happened. How many of us are in a position where we don't want to move? We don't want to act and walk with God because there's too much unsafe, there's too much risk, there's too much potential of things going wrong. The reality is that's always going to be present to a lesser or greater degree. But what we need to have faith in is the fact that Jesus will protect us, guide us, and get us through things, irrespective of what potential risks there might be around us and in us. God is far bigger than any threats the devil can create. God is far bigger than any risk there might be. God is far bigger and stronger and more powerful than anything we might see as a potential threat or a risk to us. Nor is God bound by any of that. He operates outside of that. And if, like in the instance of Pastor Grollimund, he has to create something out of nothing, he has the capability to do that. He created this world. He created us. He has the power to do stuff. But do we believe that? Do we actually believe that? I invite you to get to know Jesus. I invite you to get to know Jesus so that you can experience His power, His fight, His love for you, and what He can actually do for you, both physically and otherwise. The story of the Red Sea crossing wasn't just for the Israelites. It was for God to also teach us to go, hey, when you're in a problem, remember, I've got your back and I will sort things out the best way possible. Just watch and listen. Amen.